Evening and welcome once again to Gaming Under the Influence. I'm Mike here with Alex, coming to you from GreenDragonCVR in Woodbridge to talk about video games. How are you, buddy?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man. Finally playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which has been pretty good.
Yeah, I'd agree.
With some caveats, but we'll get into that one day.
We'll get into that at a later date. But I think I agree so far. Playing the game as well.
Yeah.
Liking it more than I thought I would, and still an open question if the story alterations will kind of devalue the themes of the original game, but we'll see how that pans out.
Tell,
we'll talk about it more at a later date, but what I think would be good to talk about now while the wave is cresting here is how to get into JRPGs like Final Fantasy in 2024, because there's so many of them, and they're fairly long and
it's true. They're quite an undertaking. It's not something you just sort of dabble in, They're
long and they're obscure. Like they have lots of made up words involved and tons of dialogue and often reading and for that reason, not knowing where to start, you could land yourself in a wasted 90 hours.
Yeah, sort of getting even a bad impression on something
of the whole genre.
Exactly.
For that reason, it might be good to consider the top few JRPG series to start with this year, ones that are out, whether they came out this year or in the past, and what a JRPG is. I think we should probably start with that.
That's fair.
Probably people would accept this definition without much argument. Is in the first place, an RPG, I think, is a game which focuses on the conduct of human life in fiction. It's like a novel in that sense, but the game version, right?
Like
it's about people and their lives and their interactions.
Yeah, good way to put it.
I don't think a Souls-like is really an RPG in that sense, right?
No.
It's its own genre. It does have that stuff, and there are characters, but it's not like you're a cipher. You're not a guy, with a name and a history and this and that. Like Cloud
not playing a role, right? That's kind of where the role playing sort of comes in.
I think the focus on distinctive characters is what makes it an RPG, and their interactions, the conduct of human life in fiction. And while there are other kinds of RPGs, what makes it a JRPG, a Japanese RPG, is usually in terms of mechanics, that it's turn-based,
typically,
like the Final Fantasy games. You enter commands in a menu during combat to make the characters attack and stuff like that, and then you wait your turn while the enemy does the same. And in terms of the fiction, I think there's this marriage of super personable and quirky character interactions. People are overly familiar and friendly. There's this almost childlike optimism to the way that people talk to each other.
Definitely. Definitely a hopefulness kind of.
And they marry that with this
a little bit goofiness.
All of the characters, their party has usually a cosmic purpose. Everybody has this kind of this Christ thing going on, right? They always have to save the world.
Save the world, exactly.
And they're chosen to do so because they were born for that reason, or they have some special, it's usually the way that it goes. So I think that's what makes it a JRPG.
Good way to put it,
And with that in mind, the best place to start is with a game that violates a number of those conventions that we just listed. And that's the Final Fantasy VII Remake and its sequel,
series,
Rebirth. I think that's the best place to start, though, for people who don't play these kinds of games, precisely because it's not like most other entries in the genre, and it's more familiar to people who are used to Western AAA games.
True. Definitely.
And apes, right?
Part of it being a modern game, easy to jump into. Also, not turn-based, not so rigidly structured.
That's
in
right.
that sense, it's just easy to get into now, right?
I think. Especially with Rebirth, this becomes even more clear because it's an open world. It's a Far Cry game. There's towers and stuff like that practically. Right? But even in Remake, there's a lot of conventions from other Western action games. Even the combat is not so dissimilar from something you're probably used to.
True, and it plays, a little bit like an action game.
It does, intentionally, right? They were kind of edging it between something like Final Fantasy 16 and Final Fantasy 7, the original, I think. And I think they were fairly successful in that. And so you could probably pick this up and not feel like that kind of shock of, boredom that you might feel if you were to just pick up a Octopath Traveler after
turn-based, menu-based, where you're just sitting kind of making decisions. If you're not into, let's say, a turn-based game, then this is the best place to start to really
to teach you how to get into turn-based games, even because there is an element of turn-based gaming in Final Fantasy VII Remake, right? Like the way it works is you can bring up a command menu.
Yep.
And this is something they brought over from Kingdom Hearts, mind you. They did have this kind of thing. It didn't pause when you brought up the menu, but you did have the same sort of. So you bring up your menu and the action pauses while you do that, and you cast spells from the menu, use items, you can select your special abilities and stuff like that. So in that sense, it's a nice mix of Western and Japanese RPG conventions, such that if you're not familiar with the genre, you can pick this one up first. It'll be a smoother transition for you, and it'll also introduce you to stuff that you'll encounter in a purer form in other items on this list.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
good place to dive in for sure.
Like I said a minute ago, I think the jury's still out on if the story changes are going to destroy the theme of the original game. It's world building and meaning, But even if that is the case, I don't think it'll change the fact that it is a very competent game.
Oh yeah,
all around, in terms of its
100%
art direction, its technological aspects like the graphics, right? It's worth checking out.
Primo, in terms of all that stuff.
It is a good JRPG and a nice mix of Western and Eastern conventions. So start with that if you don't like JRPGs. And as for the second item on our list, it's Pokemon, buddy.
Pokemon, hey!
If you haven't played a Pokemon game in the past,
Baby's first RPG.
Oh, man, this was actually my first RPG, and not only that, I think it's pretty
a lot of people probably.
Yeah, I think I learned how to read playing Pokemon Blue. Like I could read a little bit before that, like with a kindergarten reading. Like you don't really read sentences in books when you're young. But I got Pokemon, and trying to play Pokemon, I actually learned to read copious text at once.
You kind of have to, right? You won't get very far with that. The games back then were a lot more difficult than nowadays, which is why it's
Final Fantasy and Pokemon taught me to read. Actually, exaggeration.
It's true, man. It's crazy. I mean, back then there was no voice acting. There was none. Even a Pokemon series now, there's still not really much in the way of voice acting. So it's still a lot of text, and essentially these games are easier to jump into now, but I wouldn't even recommend going into the Switch ones unless we're talking about Arceus.
Yeah, you're the Pokemon expert. Tell us where we should start.
Yeah, in terms of the Pokemon games, obviously they're all great. The earlier ones are very difficult and more grindy, and not. I wouldn't recommend going into that, but the reason they are baby's first RPG is because it's very simple formula. It's like an expanded version of rock, paper, scissors, with basically all the elemental weaknesses and such. That there's no party though. Typically your party consists of 6 Pokemon, but only one of them battles at a time. So essentially in any Pokemon game you can jump into, and the battle system is not overly complicated. You'll pick it up in no time. Fire loses to water and such. Fire beats grass. Like it's
the
very
whole game
obvious.
is just collecting monsters that have certain elements to pit them against other guys' monsters that they're weak against, right?
Exactly.
That's the whole loop.
Essentially, I wouldn't recommend starting in any of the modern ones because they're just not that great. They haven't made a good transition over to the Switch, like
that
the mainline console.
Consensus.
Yeah, it's too. I think it's just too much undertaking for Game Freak. So likely the 3DS games is your best options. Even now the eShop is shut down, but they used to have the old ones on there. You could get like red, blue, yellow. Wow. I have them all on my 3DS: red, blue, yellow, gold, crystal.
Very cool.
Silver and everything.
Yeah, man. I think the
best ones, but they're expensive.
Aren't there Diamond and Pearl?
Yeah, like there's Diamond, Pearl. There's Heart Gold and Soul Silver are great because they're remakes of Gold and Silver, which is like peak
on DS. Yeah,
on the DS. Yeah, those are great
pricey
ones.
Though,
Black and White are that's the problem right now. You can probably emulate too, but also Black and White 2 are great ones. Some of the 3DS ones were good too. Even Sun and Moon I didn't mind, but I loved X and Y. They had the remakes of Ruby and Sapphire. God, there's so many now. It's crazy.
Shitload.
In any case, if you're going to play any Pokemon game on the Switch, I recommend it to be Arceus Legends. Yeah? Because that totally threw the loop upside down. And instead of focusing on battling and getting badges, gym badges, stuff like that, you were sort of a prequel where you're in the past and you're compiling the Pokedex, which is amazing. You're just kind of going out there finding new species of Pokemon. It sounds boring, but it was like the Death Stranding for Pokemon. Like, it was like kind of stripped it back and made it like a totally different thing.
That's a cool recommendation.
I loved it. Yeah,
like that. Awesome.
If the new one they announced for 2025 is anything like that one, I'll definitely jump into it right away and be stoked for it, because I was disappointed with the two most recent entries, which are on the Switch anyway, but Sword and Shield and Scarlet and Violet.
I know I didn't know it was a JRPG when I first played it, but then when I went on to play other JRPGs and understand the genre, a bit later in my life, I was always pretty, impressed by how well Pokemon encapsulates so many of the conventions that become more complicated in other games.
Yeah.
And even has hidden layers of complexity that far exceed other games.
Yeah, the IVs and the EVs.
Yeah, that's right. Because you'll find most of the stats that you'll find in a Final Fantasy character on your Pokemon.
Right.
Though, like you said, this rock, paper, scissors element makes it easy to kind of, just kind of overlook those stats.
Yeah, there's no variety in like builds. There's nothing like that. You don't equip equipment onto your Pokemon. You just have attacks that have elemental damage.
Yeah.
So it's like the expanded rock, paper, scissors, right? This is weak to that.
It's accessible because if you didn't, want to look into the stats and understand which stats boost which attack or whatever, you could just throw your fire guy out against a grass guy or whatever. And know that with some degree of confidence that it'll work out. But at the same time, there's this hidden degree of complexity behind that accessibility, in that there's these background things called IVs.
Yeah, invisible stats.
Yeah,
IVs and EVs. Yeah.
What does IV stand for?
It's like independent value or something.
Yeah, initial value or something.
Yeah,
the other
something
one's
like
effort values.
Effort value. Yeah.
There's this whole Pokemon breeding you can do in the Pokemon games, and you do this because by breeding the Pokemon you have, you can manipulate these background stats which determine their maximum active statistics, like attack or special attack.
Yeah, the starting stats could be in between like a value range, and if a perfect Pokemon would have the maximum amount of stats and starting stats. That way, when they level up, their stats will be much higher than another. Right. Yeah, there's
not only do you have to breed them, you have to level them up against certain targets, because those targets give you EVs for the stat you want to raise.
Yeah, like if you take down a Geodude because he's a hard rock type Pokemon, you'll gain a point in your defensive stat.
Right. Yeah.
So that's how you build characters, which is completely unnecessary to play the game and is only used at a competitive level.
But think about the complexity involved.
We're recommending it as a game to jump into to play RPGs, but if you are JRPGs,
there is such a thing as high level play, I guess.
Yes, you could take that, and the ceiling is insane to where you could go from there.
Probably
it has
much
a
higher
deep,
than many of the other games.
Deep competitive layer of people spend a lot of time perfecting perfectly like tailoring their Pokemon in that sense. It's insane.
I think it's cool for that reason. There's these two elements to it.
Neat stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point after something more westernized like Final Fantasy VII. And
where do we go from there?
Yeah, the next one is starting to get weird a little bit, I think.
A little bit less
accessible, more pure JRPG, I guess I would say. And it would be the Xeno series, and I'm referring to. I've never played actually the
Xeno Saga.
No, I played Xeno Saga. I never played the ones before that, Xenogears and stuff, which many people say are incredible. I hope to get around to it one day. My experience with the Xeno series is from Xeno Saga 1 and 2, not 3. And through the Xenoblade Chronicles games.
On the Switch, which is amazing that they even are still making these games. Xenoblade 3 came out recently. Xenoblade 2 came out on the Switch. Xenoblade 1 and X were, I think, Wii and Wii U games, respectively.
That's right.
It's wild to me because I didn't even know those connected to those Xeno Saga games just because I wasn't paying attention.
But some connection for sure.
It's cool to see that. It's almost like a Final Fantasy situation where they've been going on through the years, and you can almost jump in at the start of either of those series because they're independent from each other.
They do have more or less independent main storylines, so you can play them in mostly separate orders.
True, even within the series. Yeah, I wasn't even saying that, but yeah, you're right, actually. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. And the guy behind them is called Tetsuya Takahashi. He's been the director of all of the games from Xenosaga through Xenoblade, and I think that's pretty badass.
Yeah, that's cool.
And, I think what makes this series interesting is, in the first place, it's got a more, it's a little bit more grimdark before grimdark was a thing. It's focused more on violence and blood and gore, which Final Fantasy didn't have at the time. And I remember being shocked playing Xenosaga 1, the scene where these weird aliens called the Gnosis invade a space station and murder everybody.
Wow.
My 12-year-old self was thinking that was pretty intense, right? Like, it's not the kind of thing you see in Final Fantasy. Yeah, it was pretty cool. And it's just loaded with philosophical and religious subject matters. The Xenosaga games are all titled after, they all have German names ripped from the works of Nietzsche there. It's pretty goofy stuff.
Yeah.
They all have I think, they rely pretty heavily on a Gnostic cosmology where the world is like a creation of some less than divine entity.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Exploring themes like that.
That's right, yeah.
They're all really cool. And what's made them unique as time has gone on is whereas Final Fantasy has a push towards they're always trying to use more and more complex and expensive technology. They're working at the heights of AAA.
Yes.
Monolith Soft and Takahashi here, that is his name, right? I didn't fuck that up. Yeah. Monolith Soft and Takahashi, once they partnered with Nintendo in whatever capacity, I guess they're owned by Nintendo now.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, once that came about, they were kind of locked into working at a technological level that was no longer leashed to, the expectations of the AAA.
Exactly.
market,
Not making games, for the current modern systems and PCs. They're making for the Switch, which allows them to stay within a lower spec.
Or the Wii, even before that, right?
Or even before that, the Wii U. That's right, actually.
That's right. So I think what that allowed, although technologically they're fairly simple compared to something like Final Fantasy, is a breadth, a scope that you couldn't hope for in something at the AAA scale without, massive resource investment. That's why it's interesting to see something like the VII Rebirth, by the way.
True, yeah.
Its scope is pretty impressive for that scale of video game design, right? So you see something like that in the Xenoblade and in the Xenoblade Chronicle games, I think 1, 2, 3 especially, these huge and expansive worlds with they're always set on the backs of creatures in the sky and stuff like that. And I think
beautiful art stands out so much.
They were able to pursue these concepts because they weren't so focused on technological innovation, and I think that was a smart move.
Yes.
And they build these games with a much smaller team. Yep. They've retained their core design and writing squad the whole time. So I really respect Monolith Soft's design philosophy behind the Xeno games. I think it's cool that they do this. I'm glad they exist. And if you're looking for games that have the same, if not more accentuated, philosophical and religious themes that a Final Fantasy would, but with a little bit of a darker and more adult tone, I guess you could say. At least
definitely more so than Pokemon and most of the Final Fantasies. You're right.
Although I think 2 and Poppy and some of these characters, are exceptions to what I'm saying. By and large,
part of the JRPG thing is also having that that comedic levity, relief and exactly. Right, So that might be why that's there.
Yeah, but they do have their own flavor, compared to the Final Fantasy games, largely due to their creator, no doubt, who's been around through the entire, just like you can play Tetsuya Nomura's Kingdom Hearts and this Final Fantasy game and see they're made by the same guy.
The connection, definitely.
Yeah, that's the Xeno games, Xenogears, Xenosaga, and Xenoblade Chronicles.
Xenoblade,
all very worth checking out. All overseen by Takahashi since the very beginning, to my knowledge. At least the Xenosaga and Xenoblade games have been. And while it's also usually forgotten, next to Final Fantasy, I don't think it should be, because
I don't think so
it's
either.
only technologically second fiddle to Final Fantasy. I think in conceptual respect, oftentimes it's proven to be a superior series.
It feels like, to me, Xenoblade is almost still up there with the AAA, but not, you know, in terms of the
not
tech.
technologically,
like,
but
they have more,
yeah,
conceptually, and just the fact that
artistically, too.
Artistically, exactly.
Yeah, wow,
the scope that they're allowed
really carries it, eh? Even on the Wii, like the way, and like I remember the vistas from Xenoblade Chronicles 1 because you're always on the back of Mechonis or Bionis. They're two giant monsters, and always there's some vista where, you know, some limbs are stretched across the sky, and eventually you'll climb them too.
Yeah, I remember playing. I think I played the remake on the Switch, not the original on the Wii. But it's incredible how those art styles hold up over years. You know, it's a good way to go about it.
Yeah, it's very cool.
And it's nice to jump into if you want to start there. But yeah, I think that's three good places to jump into, almost in order of what we think would be the easiest to dive into, maybe, right?
Least accessible so far.
Yeah.
Although we do have a few more on this list, and we're going to come back at you with another video later in the week.
Will be part 2.
To give them the time that they deserve.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Oh, yeah.